Welcome to Not Quite Right. My name's Ed.
And I'm Amanda.
Amanda, we made it to another episode.
We did.
We didn't get cancelled.
We didn't.
Although we did get some pushback on Facebook from an account called Carolian Memes. Obviously a lover of Lewis Carroll, who wasn't...
A lover?
Don't go.
Like a lover
A lover, not a fighter.
To Lewis Carroll? Or
Of Lewis Carroll.
Okay, gotcha.
Who wasn't happy with our coverage of Lewis Carroll and our discussion of certain allegations against him.
I question whether they actually listened to the episode or whether they just were knee-jerk reacting to the comment associated with the post on Instagram. But nevertheless, they had an issue.
I think we were pretty fair in our coverage, and I think we kind of gave both sides to the extent that you can. Obviously, it was 150 years or more in the past. We don't have the smoking gun, as it were, sitting in front of us. So all we can do is discuss.
And look, this person also, I got the impression that they were very concerned about children. You know, the comment that they posted was basically along the lines of focus your energies on the real perpetrators. Why challenge him? And that bothers me.
Yeah.
Because I think he possibly was. And so therefore, like what? So we just shut up about it and don't get to talk about it because he's a really talented and well-known man? How could that possibly go wrong? I don't know. Look, we don't know. We don't know, but I've got my opinions based on, you know, his behaviour and the things that he's done. I don't have any evidence beyond what I've read about him. But I think it's important to talk about. I think these things, they exist in a context. And while I don't seek to, I guess, cancel all the old authors about things that were acceptable in the past and are maybe frowned upon now, I'm not sure that that was something that was acceptable in the past. It was just maybe something that wasn't talked about as much. And this isn't a case of, I mean, we know Roald Dahl isn't exactly everyone's favourite author at the moment either, but this isn't just about a use of language. This is about someone's behaviour in the real world. And I do think, for me anyway, that affects my perception of a person, and it does affect the way I interact with their art, because really art is like a conversation between the author in this case and the reader. And I don't necessarily want to have a conversation with that person, or if I do, I want to do it knowing the context.
Yeah.
And that context is that there's a bit of a dark cloud. I'm sorry, whether you accept it or not. And we don't know to what extent any of it's true, but we know there's a cloud.
Yeah, and I sympathise because there is a tendency to want to dig up, you know, these people's past, whoever you're talking about, authors or other celebrities, say, in the past, and pick on a few words that they've said or take things maybe out of context, maybe not, in order to bring them down. That's definitely something that's happened with a lot of people. But I think in this case, it's pretty, I'm going to say it's damning evidence, but it's definitely worth at least putting in the spotlight and discussing and making people aware of.
It's highly relevant to his work.
Yeah.
And relevant to his motivations and relevant to the meaning that we make from that art. Like, it doesn't exist in this void where the author's intentions mean nothing. We have to understand the full picture to understand what he was putting out there. And look, I don't want to spoil anyone's fun. I'm not here to say, oh, you therefore can't enjoy a piece of fiction that's written by a potentially reprehensible person. But I would like personally to do so knowing the full context.
Yeah. And we were there to talk about his writing.
Yeah.
And we did. So thanks for the feedback, Carolian Memes. I hope we did. If you did end up listening to the episode, I hope we did treat the subject with, I guess, as much fairness as we should have.
Yeah. But look, we love to hear from you all. Like, we really do love to engage with you. Like, that's why we're here. We're here having a conversation. But we really would love to have everyone else in the room. And I think social media lets us do that to some extent. So please do reach out to us if you have thoughts. You know, we're on the other end. We'll get your emails, we'll get your posts on social media, and it's fun to continue that conversation outside of this recording studio.
Yeah, send us a note on social media, send us an email. Like if you like writing, we'll probably read it out on the show.
Yeah,
like,
we might.
Not?
I mean, send Ed a love poem if you really want.
By all means.
What about the hate mail? Where should they send that?
They can send that to Amanda at Not Quite Right. So you've been spending time with a local writers group.
Yeah, that's right. I got invited to join in Coast Write, and there's such a wonderful group of people. So they have like a monthly catch-up, like a coffee catch-up. Of course, you know I don't drink coffee, so that's very awkward, but that's fine. But
Can't call yourself a writer if you don't drink coffee.
I drink alcohol.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
And cocaine. You don't drink cocaine, but you know what I'm saying.
I drink Coca-Cola. Now I know what it's like to have allegations alleged against me. So yeah, I've been spending time with Coast Right group, and it's fabulous. It's quite a big group. So you get a different mix of people each time you sort of go. And they have a Tuesday writing session where I've been to a few now. We sort of gather together and bring our laptops and do our best to stop talking every now and then to get some writing done. And it's a really great experience. And it was there that I learned this little tidbit I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on. So there was an article in the New Yorker about a year ago now titled, "Why Are TV Writers So Miserable?" Mm-hmm. And this other member of the writers group, and hello to Selena if you're listening, brought up that she'd heard somewhere, and it was this article, that screenwriters, particularly screenwriters for platforms like Netflix and other streaming services, are being told that their scripts are not second screen enough. So Netflix considers itself the second screen, meaning they know that when you're watching Netflix, you're only half watching it because your first screen is your phone. And so they're telling writers, your scripts are too confusing for someone who's only half paying attention. We want it to be something that people can engage with while they're also on their phone and only half paying attention. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this because I was aghast, I will say.
It just seems so, I mean, just to think of all of the shows that are top rated, like the best shows of all time. I mean, you know, Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad, those aren't second screen shows. They're shows that demand your full attention. And those are the shows that people get hyped about and spread the word and tell other people about and presumably help Netflix sell subscriptions.
Yeah, I don't come onto Netflix for shit.
I mean, if I want a second screen, I can watch some YouTube or I can put the radio on in the background or just the TV. Like, why would you pay for that experience?
Well, maybe they really want to be a very effective second screen, and this is what they're doing. They're trying to produce content that actually you will enjoy as a second screen because you only need to half pay attention. But to me, that's the total wrong way of going about it. Like, it's a second screen because it's shit.
Yeah.
If you make me put my phone down, well done.
Yeah.
You know, like it is hard. We're all addicted to our screens, and it is hard to sort of turn that off and focus on a piece of art and engage with it. But I want to.
Yeah.
Don't stop me. I want to. And as you've said, like these series that are just, the writing is insane and the production quality as well. But like it grips you. I don't need to go on my phone because I want to watch. I want to know what happens next. And that is the standard I want to be aspiring to. And the idea that TV writers are being told, dumb it down, not because it's too much for people, but because it's too much for people who only half want to pay attention, it just blows my mind. It's an absolute watering down of art.
It's a strange thing to say, like, because there's so much second screen content already.
Yeah.
Like, why would you purposefully set out to produce more? Like, you're not drawing anyone onto the platform.
No.
You're not creating anything new. I mean, if you want second screen content, there's plenty of like reality TV to just throw on and have in the background.
That's it. Why would you create from scratch something that is half-assed? I don't understand that, intentionally at least. I don't know. It blew my mind. It made me very sad. And in this article as well, not only was that raised, I mean, the whole article was talking about why TV writers are so miserable. But the article also just wrapped up talking about that basically TV writing now is assembly line writing. And it does feel like that. As a viewer, it feels like that. The same old shit being just churned out with a slightly different twist. And that's not what I want.
And from what I understand about TV writing as well, and I guess it depends where you're doing it and what show, but there's a lot of cooks. Like there's 7 writers, they're in a room, they're kind of throwing in ideas, and what comes out is not really one person's vision. It's just what everyone has agreed to go with, which is not always the best outcome.
Definitely not. I mean, I guess this vision of assembly line writing, like it's very industrial revolution, and it's like, this is art though.
Yeah.
We don't need art to be efficient. We don't need it to be cookie cutter. That's the opposite of what it needs to be. Like entertainment, sure. Entertainment can be efficient. Entertainment can be a little bit cookie cutter. And I guess that's all they're aspiring to. But I want art. I want something that moves me. I don't want something that just gets me from A to B. I want something that takes me on an adventure. And I know I'm not the only one. I mean, maybe they're just playing to the lowest common denominator here. But it's very Big Brother to me. It's very like, let's just numb everybody. Instead of making us feel something, let's do the opposite.
I just don't see how it works as a business model as well, because if you look historically at TV, like, you know, in the 60s to the 90s, say, where people didn't really get a choice about what they were looking at. They were looking at whatever channels were available to them. The goal of TV was just, all right, let's put some content on there that people turn on the TV and it's good enough that they'll watch through the ads. And it doesn't have to be great, you know, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking. You're actually appealing to the lowest common denominator because you're trying to get as many people just to turn it on and watch your ads. That's the business model. But then you come to the kind of later era of cable and you've got HBO and other networks that are trying to actively get people to pay for their content, a separate subscription that's not just a bundle of random channels. And so they have to create content that people actively want to
care about,
pay for and watch. It's a whole different thing. And I would have thought that Netflix is also in that game now, especially with all the competition that they have. They can't be content to just be keeping people watching rubbish. People need to see the value in what they're paying for, otherwise they won't pay for it. So it just seems to me, putting art aside, a bad business decision as well.
I feel like they know what's a good business decision. I feel like it's the money men running it. By all means, I'm sure there are plenty of people at Netflix that care about producing quality TV, but it sounds like the ultimate decision makers are holding the purse strings. Yeah. And that is the problem. Capitalism and art don't mix. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a dickhead. Maybe like TV has never been art and who am I kidding? But I've seen enough awesome TV in my life, possibly few and far between. There's more shit than there is good stuff. But why not be? It is an art form to me, but like maybe that's putting too much pressure on TV. Maybe I should be looking elsewhere for that kind of content. I don't know. Sometimes I am just looking for rubbish. Don't get me wrong. I watch plenty of shit. I'm not above it. I love it. But that's just to pass the time.
Yeah.
I want, like, when something amazing comes along, I'm so excited and you just devour it. You know, that's why we all binge it. You know, we're devouring this because we're so desperate for something that's meaningful and true, that sparks something in us, makes us feel alive, makes us feel seen, or makes us connect with something in a new way. Maybe it's too much to ask that TV do that.
I mean, TV can be art. I don't think it is art by definition. Like, it's probably the exception that you get a truly great, well-written, well-acted, well-produced TV series. I mean, there really aren't that many when you think of just how many TV series are being made. You know, you're talking about capitalism. Sometimes the incentives line up. Like, people do want good quality shows, but you can also make a lot of money selling Keeping Up with the Kardashians Series 25.
And there's a place for both of those. Again, don't get me wrong. I'm not above Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I watch plenty of trash reality TV, or I have done. I just don't want to see the good stuff disappear. Yeah. That's it. You can have all the channels of shit in the world. Great. Because sometimes I want to go there. But please don't dumb down good stuff. Don't dumb it down. Like, don't water it down. Why? I don't understand that. As you've said, there's already enough crap there. If I'm not in the mood to engage, fine. That's fine. I'll watch something else. But don't take away the option for me to engage meaningfully with something. That's sad. It's sad for the writers too. Like, the article's called Why TV Writers Are So Miserable. Like, I understand as a writer myself, if I was told that, essentially your stuff is too good. Sorry, can you just make it less good? Yeah. Like, how depressing. How does that make someone want to continue? They wouldn't. Yeah. And on top of that, there's all these other pressures that the article talks about in terms of cutting budgets for writers. We know the writers in the US have just gone on this big strike, and every time there's a writer's strike for the next 4 years,
it's shit TV.
It's shit TV. It's shit movies. And we'd only just come out of the last slump and had a couple of good things, and then here we go again. Great.
But now they've got ChatGPT, so I'm sure it'll be really great.
It'll be fine. Let's get it to write some right now. Go on. While you're doing that, I'm just going to say something else. I know I'm your second screen right now. When Netflix originally came along, I was so excited because I've always considered the 90s like peak TV. And I know I'm super biased, but I really do feel like you were talking about things aligning, you know, the commercialism of it aligning with the desire for quality programming. I think that happened in the 90s. We had so many amazing, and comedies in particular, we had so many amazing comedies. And, you know, The Simpsons was huge, like the peak Simpsons, like Seinfeld, these shows that I think of as peak TV. And then it just fell away and reality TV took over and it just became shit. And so when Netflix came along with a new model and was financing these big budget TV shows, which of course commercial TV or free-to-air TV in Australia was really struggling to make money. And so when Netflix came along and had all this money and it's suddenly they're producing these really high quality, like very visual, engaging, well-written, dramatic pieces. And I'm thinking, this is the renaissance of TV. Like I am so excited. And it was great for a while. And Breaking Bad is an example. Breaking Bad was one of the earlier sort of really well-written pieces that came along. And now it's like it's all fallen away. And now Netflix is turning to shit as well. Like, what's coming next? Bring on the next era. Come on, Taylor Swift. Where's the era?
So I've got a script here for Breaking Bad.
Oh,
via ChatGPT.
Amazing. So this is what we've got to expect. Is this Breaking Bad
I just asked
sequel?
for a new episode.
Oh, an episode. Okay.
This episode of Breaking Bad, written by ChatGPT, called Chemical Crossroads. Interior meth lab, night.
So far,
real creative there, ChatGPT. The glow of fluorescent lights illuminates the clandestine lab where Walter White, clad in his signature yellow hazmat suit, and Jesse Pinkman, his former student turned partner in crime, work meticulously. They're in the midst of a high-stakes cook, their faces etched with a mixture of determination and anxiety. Walter.
Steady, Jesse. We're almost there.
Jesse, nervously glancing at the bubbling mixture.
Yeah, Mr. White, but what if we get busted again?
Walter locks eyes with Jesse, his gaze unwavering.
We won't. Not this time. We've covered our tracks, Jesse. We're in control.
As they continue working, a loud bang echoes through the lab, causing both men to freeze. They exchange a tense glance before cautiously approaching the source of the noise. They find Todd Alquist, a former associate, standing in the doorway, his gun drawn and a sinister grin on his face. Todd.
Well, look who we got here, boys.
Oh my God.
Walter's jaw tightens, his mind racing with possibilities. Walter.
Todd, what the hell are you doing here?
Todd steps forward, his gaze...
There's a lot of gazing.
Yes. Todd steps forward, his gaze flickering between Walter and Jesse. Todd.
I'm here for what's mine, Mr. White, and you and your partner are going to help me get it.
Jesse's eyes widen in realization as he looks at Walter. Jesse.
You owe this guy money, Mr. White?
Walter's expression remains stoic as he squares his shoulders, his mind working overtime to devise a plan. Walter.
We can work something out, Todd. There's no need for violence.
But Todd's smile only widens, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Todd.
Oh, I think there is. You see, I've got a proposition for you two, and trust me, you're going to want to hear it.
As Todd motions for them to follow, Walter and Jesse exchange a wary glance, knowing that their fate hangs in the balance. I don't know.
Jeez.
That's pretty good. I mean, look.
Is it though? Well, what have we got here?
What have we got here? It's not cliched at all. I mean, for a screenplay, for a script, there's a lot of like...
Gazing and glancing.
Gazing and squaring of shoulders.
Tightening of jaws.
Yeah.
Sounds like a first draft of mine. Listen, that was so fucking vanilla. I don't know what to tell you.
I know, this is pretty second screen.
But you know what? I tuned out while you were talking and I still understood what was happening. So I guess, it's a winner.
So we're going to be talking about Poor Things in a minute.
We're going to struggle to talk about Poor Things.
We will
is what
struggle.
We're going to do. Mm-hmm.
Poor Things was based on a book by Alistair Gray. And I was wondering what you thought of book-to-movie adaptations. Like, do you have a strong opinion on them?
Well,
I have a strong opinion about everything.
this is the thing. Most writers and readers have really strong opinions. But, excuse me, wait, hang on. What did I miss there? I was too busy telling you my opinion.
I just said you have a strong opinion about everything.
It's quite a strong opinion you have there. No, you're right. I mean, I haven't read Poor Things, to be fair, but just in general, thinking of book-to-movie adaptations, like, a lot of people hate them, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh no, they want it to happen, and then it happens, and they're enraged by how terrible it was done, and we just froth on getting enraged about it, and
I think the correlation is like the more that you love the book, the more you hate the movie adaptation.
100%. And I've certainly had my times of feeling that way, but I think I've like almost evolved beyond that now. Like they're just different things. And for sure there's shit movies and there's shit adaptations, but there's just shit movies anyway.
Yeah.
Right? And so to me it's not a case of, oh, this was a shit adaptation. It's like it was just a disappointing shit movie. But at the same time, maybe that's just a case of me not being so attached to a book and therefore like not having that care that it's like your baby and you're just the reader. Like imagine how the writer feels. Bit like, oh, you've butchered it and it's not the same. Like I guess as a writer, I understand that it's impossible for a movie to do everything that a novel does. And so I don't hold that expectation and I sort of treat it as a separate thing. And I'm okay when, for example, they change a character or they delete scenes. Like I know that that's necessary. Sometimes I might disagree with the choices they've made and think, well, why did you delete that bit that was vitally important or what have you? But I'm not shocked when it happens. It's just impossible. It is literally impossible to create a movie that in a faithful way represents what an entire novel is able to achieve.
I think they're fundamentally different mediums, right? And there are some novels that are written very direct and very visually and are mostly dialogue with description. And yes, you can translate that really well to a screen.
Yeah.
There are other novels with different challenges that don't translate so easily. And I think the best adaptations definitely take that into consideration and make it work for the medium that you're telling the story in. That might mean that you have to get rid of a narrator or add a narrator or like just change the viewpoint. That's a normal thing that you would need to do.
And my understanding, and we'll get into it later, but my understanding is that poor things, they did change the pivotal character. So that was an artistic decision that was made for the film. And like I said, like I don't have an issue with that necessarily. Like I may on a particular occasion disagree with that specific choice and think, no, that was a bad choice. You've watered something down or you've ruined the point of the story. I think to me, that's the thing. If you've got the essence of the story, then I'm okay with it being told in a slightly different way because, it's a totally different format. It's a visual format. It's dialogue driven. It's not description driven. It's different. You cannot achieve the same things, but you can maybe achieve the same message. You can maybe like make the same point in a different way. And that's, I think, what I'm looking for. But at the same time, I can just read the book. So I don't necessarily want the most faithful adaptation of a book because I could just read the book. I want something different. And I think maybe the disappointment lies in, if you love the book and then it's missing your favorite bits, for sure. But also just maybe it's this dumbing down of something too, like that you think, no, this is just cheap. Like they've just bought the rights and they've had a shit team of writers, given them no time, and they've just produced it for the dollars. Now, that's the issue, I think, most of the time. Not so much an adaptation, but an issue of how they went about it and like what their intentions were. Were they just there to make a quick buck or were they there to faithfully represent this story? And I think you will see in the adaptations that are loved that it's done by a fan, it's done by someone who cares deeply about the subject matter, and they might have their own angle that not everyone agrees with, but they've engaged with it on this deep level and they've really tried to put that message that they felt back out there again in a new medium. And I respect that, even if I don't always agree with it.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is it a good movie or not? And it has to stand on its own. A lot of people, fans of books will complain that things have changed or that things are just, it was better in the book. That's the common thing.
And of course it was. Of course it was.
That's right.
A novel,
it's not going to change.
Like in terms of the amount of things that you can achieve, a novel is always going to be able to achieve 10 times more than a 2-hour movie.
Yeah, it's a different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've spoken about actually on the podcast 2 adaptations already, which are Wuthering Heights and The Dead. And both of those were fairly faithful to, or at least The Dead was. The Dead was pretty
Wuthering
close.
Heights, not so much.
Wuthering Heights, not so much. There are a few different versions, as we said on that episode. They were faithful to the first half, and then they pretty much discarded the second half, which you made the comment at the time as well that you can't really do that. You lose so much of the story. But at the same time, that would have been a long movie and it's a big story to tell, and they're kind of just focusing on the romance element of the whole thing between Heathcliff and Kathy.
I mean, I'm not sure if I said it on the podcast, but I certainly remember thinking it at the time that I would love to see like a Netflix or
Yeah, no,
whatever
you did
remake,
actually, yeah.
like where it's drawn out into multiple episodes, because I believe Wuthering Heights lends itself to that massively. It's not a 2-hour movie.
Yeah.
There's too much going on and all of it's important in its own way. But yeah, no, I disagree that Wuthering Heights was faithful. It wasn't. I mean, bits were. And I hated the casting of Ralph Fiennes. I don't think he's appropriate as Heathcliff at all. And for that reason alone, it was a fail in terms of a faithful representation of the book.
Yeah, and then also Catherine was French, remember?
Yeah.
Just didn't make any sense.
Her too.
Yeah.
Both of them. They were terribly cast. And that is a huge factor, like the casting, because everybody's got a different picture in their head. And I just have this distinct memory of my dad, who was always just obsessed with Tolkien and wanted to get me into it. And I am not a fantasy reader. I just never have been, never will be. So I was a huge disappointment to my father because he wanted to share this love of fantasy with me and I just was not receptive to it. I remember just how excited he was about Lord of the Rings because to him, and I know to many people, it is an extremely faithful representation given the constraints of the format to the novel and like the whole series and just visually and character-wise. And you know why that is? It's because they had teams of fans consulting on it to have input because they gave a shit about that factor because they knew that the people who loved the book could never love the movie if it was not faithful. Like that was one where you sort of really needed to respect that. And so it shone through. And yes, of course, there's whole chunks missing. Of course, that's just always going to be the case. But the vibe, I think, was very fairly represented. So imagine that. Imagine, and this is diehard fans, imagine being able to show what they all pictured in their minds as they were reading this book. I mean, that's a credit to Tolkien, really, to evoke an image that's so clear that everybody's getting the same picture in their head. But even the casting and so on, like these are vital decisions that I think aren't maybe taken as seriously as they need to be for some stories. Not every story needs to be that faithfully represented.
And The Lord of the Rings is an interesting one as well because it is touted as one of the greatest adaptations of all time. It's a lot of people's favourite movies. But there is also the Hobbit trilogy that uses a lot of the same visual elements and styles, but is, I won't say universally hated, but it's definitely not as highly regarded. And part of that is because they took one book and kind of stretched it out for financial reasons into a trilogy where it didn't really need to be. And it didn't have that, I guess, loyalty or love of the source material that Lord of the Rings did.
It comes through. It very clearly comes through. I mean, we talked about that too when we're talking about reboots and all that sort of thing, that you can tell when it's a fan who's done it and it matters because you can feel it. You can feel the love for it coming through. And when you are, as a viewer or a reader or whatever it is, coming to this art, loving it, and you can feel that the other person loved it too, you connect on that basis. Like you're just geeking out over the same thing. And that makes it a more enjoyable experience. Whereas if you love it and you're trying to geek out and the person on the other side is like, give me your money, it's not so much fun.
Yeah. So I've got a list here of several examples of, I guess, the most loved movie adaptations of all time. And I think what they share in common is not necessarily like some element of how the screenplays come about and how closely it follows the book. They're all great movies by great directors and top-tier famous directors in most cases. For example, The Shining, famously hated by Stephen King. Stephen King hated that movie, but it's absolutely a classic, directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Jack Nicholson, like a classic movie. Jaws, Steven Spielberg. I don't know how closely Jaws follows the
Nobody gives a shit because they only watch the movie.
Exactly. Nobody cares. Jurassic Park, same director.
Jurassic Park. I have read Jurassic Park. Yeah. I think it is a pretty faithful representation of the book and epic film, timeless.
No Country for Old Men. So that's a Cormac McCarthy novel and a Coen Brothers movie. And you can't capture what Cormac McCarthy brings to that book because it's all in kind of his prose and the way he writes. But the movie is something else and it's also great. The Godfather, Francis Ford Coppola.
Again, like many of these are really just considered the best films and no one would even know they were like an adaptation of a book. Yeah. So you mentioned Stephen King, and I think what's really interesting about Stephen King is that it's short stories in a lot of cases that have been adapted into films. And I think we mentioned that last time or recently that that's probably enough for a film. A good short story, a dense short story, more so than a novel, which is usually way too much for a film. And that's where people start to get upset that bits are missing.
Yeah.
So The Body, which was translated into Stand By Me, is a great example. There's actually a lot going on in that movie. Apparently that's heavily autobiographical story about Stephen King, apart from The Body itself. Everything else was. I don't know, that movie, like it's got a real heart and soul to it. And I know, like having read his opinions of it, yes, he hated The Shining, but he loved Stand By Me. And I think was quite moved by how faithfully it represented not only his story in that case, but his own life.
Yeah.
So that's hard to do. But that film's connected with so many people and is a timeless classic, really. And so are all the horrors. Like imagine making horrors that are timeless classics, because there's so many that are definitely not, that are embarrassing even 6 months later.
I think you're right as well about the short stories. It gives the screenwriter a little bit of space to actually develop and fill in the gaps to create something that works in a movie setting.
Add value instead of losing value.
Yeah, just like how can we cut this and still have it make sense? It's rather how can we kind of expand this and develop the characters a bit more fully.
And I know Poor Things is the opposite of that, essentially.
Right, yeah.
There's a lot more going on in the novel than what was able to be achieved in the film.
Yeah. I don't think there are too many great adaptations of a long novel that have kind of been condensed into a movie that I can think of.
What do you mean by a long novel?
Like, okay, so I'm looking through my list of movie adaptations here. Iron Legend, it's quite a short novel. It's like 100 and something pages maybe. The Great Gatsby is also a fairly short novel.
And again, I mean, we're talking about The Dead. That's a short story as well.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm thinking too of adaptations of plays. And of course, an adaptation of a play is going to fit just fine into a film. And all the many, many adaptations and interpretations of Romeo and Juliet, for example, and other Shakespearean works that have been done. But okay, so we're talking about faithful representations before. A very unfaithful representation, but which held very true to the actual text, to me, is Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. When that first came out, that was something very fresh that had not been done before. The visual humor, for example, guns that were called long swords, all of those sorts of things to make the original language work in a modern setting was like epic to me.
Yeah.
And more meaningful to me as a modern audience member than a more faithful
that's true.
representation based on the period costumes or whatever might have made it more Shakespearean.
It was faithful to the word, right, wasn't it?
Down to the word. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there were bits that were cut or slightly edited. I can't speak to that, but I will say it's very close.
Yeah.
And I mean, the characters are completely reimagined. The settings are obviously completely reimagined. And there's whole scenes. So, for example, the scene in the petrol station, which is very memorable, which isn't so much dialogue at all.
Yeah.
It's quite visual. And yes, there's some interaction between the characters, but there's a lot of other shit that's going on there's no words to go with. And it's all visual storytelling that is not present in Shakespeare's play, but which is totally fitting and which works in its setting and which, again, is incredibly memorable. And this is what we're talking about before, about adding value. It adds something different. It adds a layer that wasn't there before. The story's still the same, but it's a retelling and it's something that has an opportunity to connect with the audience in its own way, in its own right, separate to the text.
It captures the mood or the vibe for a new generation, I
100%.
guess. Yeah.
And makes it accessible to a new generation. I mean, Romeo and Juliet as a story, as we know, has been told and retold in countless different ways. And, we think of West Side Story, like that's same sort of thing. Like it just takes the story and plonks it in a completely different context and it works again, but has its own message that it's trying to share. People connect with that.
Another movie I can think of that is a kind of similar reimagining is Apocalypse Now.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a adaptation of Heart of Darkness.
Right.
But instead of being set in Africa, we're in the Vietnam War and it's kind of a whole different setting, but it's the same story. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some scope there of creating that kind of connection just by transposing the characters. And
you can only do that if you love it deeply, I think. I'm also thinking too, we're talking about short stories, we're talking about plays, that these are things that can more easily be adapted. What about kids' books too? Because I think that that's another opportunity. Kids' books are often shorter and so can more easily translate to a screen. So I want to ask you, have you seen Wonka?
The new one? No, with Timothée Chalamet. No, I have not.
Do you have any intention to see it?
It's not something that I'm hankering to see. I don't know. You seen it? No.
I have no intention.
Yeah.
I mean, I would just out of morbid curiosity, but I feel like I've already seen it because I've seen enough trailers now to know what I'm going to get. It aggravates me. And so does, by the way, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory starring Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
Because in my
I have to say
mind,
Johnny Depp aggravates me in a lot of ways.
I mean, yeah. No. I mean, he's hot though, so it's fine. But
is he though? Is he? Have you seen him? Like
lately? Not so much, but definitely in his heyday. 10 out of 10, no notes. Anyway, point being, to me, the 76 something version of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory starring Gene Wilder is, to me, perfection.
Yeah.
And I don't know why you would try and readapt something that has already been done perfectly. Yeah. You're just going to fail. Sorry. You can't replicate that.
I don't know why they do that.
And I don't know that was necessarily a faithful representation of Roald Dahl's original work. I don't really think it was, to be honest.
I don't think it was. I remember reading or seeing some video essay about this and Gene Wilder, I guess, making up that character and deciding, no, I want him to be completely just flippant and harsh to all the kids and just uncaring about what happens to them. That's what I want out of that character. And the studio was like, no, we can't have kids will get scared and kids are not going to vibe with it. But no, it worked. And
that's magic. That's movie magic, man. Yeah. Like you can't even plan that. That's artists doing what they do and knowing, I don't know, like on a soul level, what's going to work. But then you have someone else come along and reimagine it and it just falls dead. And look, I'm sure plenty of people enjoyed Wonka. I know Timothée, what is it, Chalamet or Chamalay? Shalala. That people love him. I find him offensive. So that's,
Timothée Chalamet? Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of him.
I couldn't be more whelmed if I tried.
Yeah, he's not someone who jumps out to me as like, oh, like I'm questioning his acting ability.
Listen.
He's just not just doesn't stand out to me.
No, he's no Wonka. Come on. He's no Gene Wilder. Get real. You can't just put not hot, like, because he's not hot to me. You can't just put a popular flash in the pan. What's the word I'm looking for? Because the only word that's coming to my head is, yes, okay, so flavor of the month. And expect it to work. That's not how it works. So another one I'm thinking of is The Princess Bride.
Oh, yeah.
And The Princess Bride is a bit Inception-y. It's like a book within a film about
like
a book.
A never-ending story as well. Yeah.
But what I thought was interesting about The Princess Bride is that the author of The Princess Bride adapted his own novel. So he wrote the screenplay. Oh, right. He was apparently an experienced screenwriter, so managed to hit all of the most important beats because he already had it in his head and was able to achieve it. And I mean, that's a timeless classic as well. Okay, so another frequently adapted author is Jane Austen.
Yes.
And not just adapted, but also like reimagined. And what do you think? Do you have a fave? Do you have thoughts and feelings?
I feel like they're all pretty true to the books, right? That they tend to be, those Austen adaptations tend to be fairly true to the books, and it's all about whether you like the actors.
Yeah, if your Darcy is hot or not. Yeah. And if he flexes his hand or not. Yeah. These are crucial elements.
Like you wouldn't get Timothée Chalamet to play Mr. Darcy. It just would not work.
Oh my God. Don't even say that. Look, I'm not even a Darcy stan, right? Like I don't care for any version of Darcy, including the book version. Like say what you mean, mate. Don't waste my time for an entire novel. I know he resonates with plenty of people. But okay, here's another Inception for you. The book Bridget Jones is based on Pride and Prejudice. And then we have the film of Bridget Jones, which is based on the book of Bridget Jones, which is based on Pride and Prejudice. And then we have
Mr. Darcy,
who is played by the same actor who plays Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. Yeah. Like, this is love, right? Like, this is passion for the original source material. Obviously, Bridget Jones was incredibly successful, and I think that's why. Yeah,
well, it's part of it.
Yeah, it's a huge part of it. My brother, who is famously a pretty angry man, he likes metal. You know, he's got a great sense of humor, but he's quite serious as well at the same time. For some reason, he has a real soft spot for Bridget Jones. It's up there in his favourite movies, from what I understand.
Maybe he just has a thing for big underwear.
Ew. Thank you for that. That was like just a charming little pleasant anecdote, and now I'm going to have to be traumatised for life.
I've got one more to add. This is related to Timothée Chalamet, who we can't stop talking about.
I know, like, what is that about?
And that's the new Dune movie. And that's a book adaptation and another book that people said could never be made into a movie. It's now made into a 2-part movie with more to come.
Was there another movie previously? I feel like
there
it was.
one in 1984, and that was the David Lynch version, which was universally panned and is not a good movie.
Right.
So yeah, that's one that is very successful right now and is beloved by fans in similar way to Lord of the Rings has been.
It's like a revival of Dune, I guess. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got, just to tie up the conversation, I've got my number one adaptation for you.
Okay.
And the adaptation is the 2024 film starring Ariana Grande, yet to be released, Wicked. All right. So the film Wicked from 2024 is based on the musical Wicked that has done the rounds on Broadway and across the world, which is based on a book from 1995 called Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West by Gregory Maguire, which is based on both the original novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and the 1939 film, The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
So we've got a film based on a musical, based on a book, based on both a book and a film. Like, that's passion.
It's also a great idea to get your story off a out of copyright.
Yeah, I was thinking that about about the novel, about the 1995 novel. I'm like, let's do that. I mean, Disney's all over that. You should talk to them.
There's a million we could talk about. I mean, there's like the whole James Bond series.
Yeah.
Are there any books that haven't been made into movies? No.
Literally none.
None. Not one I could think of.
I mean, we were talking before about like art dying, basically, and books are probably, I don't know. I mean, obviously there's still a huge commercial aspect to traditionally published books, but there's still this kind of layer of gatekeeping about what is going to be allowed through. And you've sort of got to meet a certain standard before a traditional publisher will look at your work. And they're certainly not saying dumb it down. That's not what's being said by book publishers. They want it to be deep and grippy. And so, of course, if you're making films, where would you get better stories than books?
Yeah.
Because, of course, we don't have time for someone to like come up with an original screenplay. If I'm a producer, okay, you might get lucky and have someone approach you with an original screenplay, but taking a risk on that is going to financially seem difficult. Whereas if you know there's a book out there already that's had commercial success, the story is great, it's perfect. Like,
it's already been tested. It's already proven that it can sell. So
which, I mean, I hate in a way, but I would much rather that than just keep rehashing these superhero movies.
Yeah, because it is pretty hard to write a good story from scratch. And when you write a movie from scratch, what are the odds that it's actually going to be successful? I mean, take the flip side of name a popular successful movie that wasn't based on something that was previously written or something that previously existed. And the same director, I think, Back to the Future.
Well, that director and screenwriter.
Is it the same director? Yeah.
The writer of Home Alone also wrote like 16 Candles and all of these film cult classics, but not cult classic, popular classics, timeless classics. What's his name?
John Hughes.
John Hughes, yeah. And so that's just a genius at work, if you ask me. It can happen. But yes, that's also a writer who is tested, who has proven themselves, who now, like, they've got their back catalogue and everyone goes, I love that movie. I might like this one too. And luckily that person can deliver every time.
Each episode, Amanda and I take turns recommending each other books or movies that we may not have chosen for ourselves. It's a segment we call Get Wrecked. But this is one that you may have chosen for yourself because I think you said that you were going to watch it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've heard the buzz, so it was my intention to watch it. Yep. But I am famously too busy to do anything fun. So, I had not yet got there.
Well, before we get into it, 2 things to say. Number 1, spoiler warning.
Oh, yeah.
As always, we're going to spoil what happens in this movie.
Some may say it spoils itself, but,
Some may say.
Some may.
And also a warning about some of the themes and content that we talk about. Might be a bit violent, maybe a bit dark, maybe a bit sexual.
Yeah. A little?
So
a little R-rated, let's put it that way.
So you wouldn't take your children to see this movie?
No, I wouldn't take myself to see this movie, having seen this movie.
Would you see it with your mother like you saw Leo Grande? Or was your mother-in-law that you saw? It was
my mother-in-law. I would not recommend it as a movie to go to with either your children or your mother-in-law, no. So I'll just go out on a limb and say that.
All right, so just to introduce this movie, Poor Things, 2023, won a number of Oscars, a number of awards.
Mm-hmm.
So Best Actress.
4 Oscars.
4 Oscars. Was nominated for 11, won 4.
Not sure how many Golden Globes.
Don't know. They don't count.
Once you got an Oscar, it's all over. Forget it. Mm-hmm.
So Best Actress, Emma Stone, Best Production Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, and Best Costume Design.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, all of those I think are probably warranted.
Oh, 100%. Costumes?
Mm-hmm.
Chef's kiss. Which means a lot coming from someone who just wears a white apron. Anyway.
What exactly are you talking about?
I am talking about
Precisely.
having gotten through half that bottle of wine by myself.
I see.
So far, and
we're
being
at this
hot.
stage. All right. So this movie, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, who's a Greek director, and a director I really like, actually, and I would recommend even to you, The Lobster. Have you seen The Lobster?
I've seen The Lobster.
Okay. Did you like it? Okay. So maybe my recommendations are not all that.
No comment.
So by way of introduction, I looked at some of the reviews on Letterboxd. Lara says, it's Barbie 2023, but for mentally ill people.
Give that woman the Oscar.
Olaf says, watched this with my mom, sad face.
Oh, Olaf, I'm so sorry.
Okay, so before we get into the detail of this movie, I just wanted to ask, when I introduced this movie last episode, I said I had a feeling that it would make you angry.
No, you said you thought I was going to hate it, didn't you?
Well, I said you would hate it and it would make you angry.
Right.
Did that turn out to be true?
First of all, can I give my very brief
Yeah,
review
you
to
can-
add
you can-
to
you can throw in your review.
just my little one sentence? This is my one. I watched it in German for 10 minutes and didn't realize.
You were just like, oh, this is really out there. This is
this-
avant-garde shit.
This feels appropriate.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's my one-line review. No, listen.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of how I feel about it, I would like to get back to you in 5 to 10 business days.
Okay.
I am not sure how I feel about this film.
Yep.
I am hoping that this conversation will help me understand how I feel about this film.
Yeah, and like I said last time when I introduced it, like I've got mixed feelings about this movie as well. Like, yeah, I wouldn't say it's something that 100% landed with me. It's a movie that I thought had some really good elements. Definitely a movie worth making and worth seeing.
100%. I agree with
I'm
that.
glad that it was made, but I wouldn't come out of it saying, yes, like that is a movie that got me.
You
Or-
feel seen.
I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel like...
Obscene, perhaps.
I didn't feel like it necessarily had a clear point that was right, you know, like it wasn't
It wasn't a
speaking profound
universal truth or something. Yeah.
But there were elements that were great, and we'll get into what those are and what those aren't. But just to outline in general what the story is, think of it as a retelling of the Frankenstein story in a way.
Sorry. No, that's too flippant of a remark. I can't just let
Okay,
that slide.
cool.
It's not a retelling of the Frankenstein story.
Well, it
No, 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 no.
draws on
No.
the Frankenstein
No.
story.
No,
No, in
that
no
bothers
way.
me.
Okay.
I don't think so because can we get into that later?
You
It's
brought
too
it
much.
up.
I've got no. You
Okay.
brought it up.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of thoughts and feelings about the Frankenstein thing.
So I'm not going to say it's a retelling of the Frankenstein story because
Good.
I'll get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is it draws a lot on Frankenstein as an influence. Like it has a lot of similar elements in the characters. It's got a very 19th century vibe, that like almost steampunk kind of
100%.
retrofuturism, but from the 19th century. There's flying cable cars through the sky and there's all sorts of science that is like magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the setting is basically that world, but the real world in London. Visually, all of the sets are very opulent. They're very,
I heard someone
Intricate.
describe it as like Gaudi.
yeah,
Yeah, and I fully see that. Like just very like visually beautiful
Yeah.
like shapes and colors and just over the top completely.
But what's interesting is that they feel like sets. Like it looks like it's on a soundstage. All the little city models look like models. Like there's no attempt at realism. It doesn't
And
try
they're all
to.
very isolated, aren't they? That's not, you don't
Yeah.
feel like you're part of a world.
No.
You feel like you are in a I don't know, vortex, like an individual place.
Yeah. And the weird thing is that prevents you from ever feeling like getting lost in the movie. Like you always feel like you're watching a movie. You always feel like there's an artifice there.
100%.
And music-wise, sound-wise, there's...
Sound-wise, it's like enjoying your, year 2 kid learning the recorder at home. That's what it is. I heard someone say, or I read someone say, it's not the kind of movie where you walk away like humming the tune.
No, it isn't. So as the movie opens, we're introduced to the character of Bella Baxter, and there's clearly something wrong with her. Like she's moving awkwardly. She's got basic speech. She can't form complete sentences. And she's
relatable.
Especially in your current state. She's described by Max McCandles as a pretty little retard at the start of the movie. But to be fair, she's a baby, basically. So we as the audience come to learn fairly quickly about her backstory, but she is kept ignorant of the backstory. You know, in fact, it's set up in the opening shot where we see a pregnant, well-dressed woman throw herself off the Tower Bridge in London onto the rocks and the water below. And so that woman turns out to be Victoria Blessington. And what happened is a man named Godwin Baxter has taken her body, removed her brain, and put the brain of the unborn baby into her head.
Yeah, so she was dead, but the baby was still alive somehow, magically. And so he took the living baby's brain and gave it to her.
Yeah, and a la Frankenstein, reanimated her into this new person called Bella Baxter. And the reasons he gives for doing that are, in a twisted way, are perfectly compassionate and logical. He reasons that if he just brought her back to life, I don't think her brain was dead. I think she was capable, but I think he thought, well, if I just bring her back to life and let her carry on as normal, well, she'll be put into a mental asylum or into a prison. And also, clearly, she wanted to die.
Yeah.
So,
whereas putting her baby's brain into her head and reanimating her is a straightforward, no problem kind of solution.
well, he thought, well, why let the child die also? And he says, well, the solution was obvious. I'll just take the baby's brain and put it into her head and everyone's happy and I've solved the problem.
Pretty straightforward thinking. Well done. 2 thumbs up.
So he's an interesting character. So Godwin Baxter is one of the central characters in this movie. You know, he's very
He's Frankenstein, right?
Yeah.
And she's Frankenstein's monster. We need to make this clear.
The thing is, he's Frankenstein, but he's also Frankenstein's monster.
He is.
Because he's disfigured. He keeps alluding to these incidents in his upbringing with his father, where his father has just performed these gruesome and horrific experiments on him. And he's kind of adapted this persona of detachment from that to
not even
deal with
detachment. It's like he loves it. It's a loving attachment, actually, where he explains it all away and justifies his father's behavior and sort of experiences all the experiments as a loving act as opposed to horrifically cruel acts, which they are very clearly exposed to be. So that's an interesting element. I wouldn't say he's detached, he's attached.
But he's desensitized to how horrific these things are. Like one of the things that his father did to him is he enclosed his thumbs inside a box to see if he could stop the thumbs from growing and basically disfigured them. He removed his
stomach acid or something.
Glands to prevent him making gastric juices. And so now he blows these weird
he's attached
bubbles
to a machine to help him digest his food because he doesn't have the stomach acid to process it. And so, he blows the
and he's a eunuch
bubbles.
as well. So he's been well fucked up by his dad.
Yeah.
And he's kind
been
of
through it.
Carrying on that tradition, but it seems with some compassion about him. Like he seems to have his heart in the right place, I think.
Godwin's dad
Baxter.
or Godwin?
Godwin himself. So,
and there's no accident that his name is God and that she calls him God throughout the film. He's clearly playing God by bringing her back to life.
So by profession, he's a surgeon, and his surgery often involves kind of mixing and matching of body parts, and he's got all of these in the house, all these weird chimeras running around like half dog, half duck, half pig, and they just run around and they're quite funny.
They are funny. It's very comical, isn't it? It's very dark comedy. So Godwin Baxter is Willem Dafoe and Bella Baxter is Emma Stone.
Yep.
And I've heard that Emma Stone described this film as a rom-com. but where it's her as the leading lady, but not where she's falling in love with a man, but where she's falling in love with life.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting description. Completely misleading. So if you're going into it looking for a rom-com, you're going to be bitterly disappointed. But I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. And it's almost as fucked up as Godwin Baxter thinking his dad was just lovingly like torturing him. So
it is a way to think about the movie. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I mentioned Max McCandles. He's the third character we're introduced to, and he's a young medical student who Godwin brings in to basically observe and document Bella's development. So initially, Godwin tells Max that she's suffering from a brain injury, but later on he reveals the truth. Mm-hmm. And of course, while being with her and observing her, he falls madly in love with her.
Which is just the male condition, right? Do I bring that up now?
If you like.
This is one of the aspects which is probably the thing that you thought would make me angry. Mm. And it does make me angry, but it also makes me laugh because she is a baby mentally in a woman's body. So, of course, all the dudes are into her and they just can't get enough. Like, she's got no idea what's going on. Mm. Awesome. And I find all of that so disgusting. And
but do you think
fine.
It's true? Like, it's fair enough if you think it's disgusting because that's like, but art is making you feel something. Like, is it reflecting a reality?
100% true. And that's what's wrong with it, right?
Do you think if the movie was different and instead of Emma Stone, we had Timothée Chalamet in the character of Bella Baxter, would you
It doesn't work, does it? It doesn't work because that's not how the world works. I mean, completely being sexist, but there was a lot of that sort of commentary in this film and it was very clear. And this is where I loved how you opened it sort of saying like how you're not sure how you feel about it. You're super glad that it was made, but that doesn't mean you love it. And that is exactly how I feel actually. I'm so glad this film was made, but that stuff makes me so uncomfortable because it's true, but also because it's like perpetuating it. It's not just true, it's like more of it. And I don't want to see it. It makes me physically ill, the idea that women are just objectified like that. And the fact that she is so stupid or so unable to comprehend what's going on about her that makes her absolutely irresistible to every man around her. And I'm annoyed at myself for getting annoyed about it because I just feel like a machine that's just been triggered and switched on and I got the shits. But it is something pervasive in our culture and it's exposing that and that's uncomfortable. And I like that it's doing that. But as we'll get into, I'm sure, the R rating of this film is just perpetuating more of that. And I just find that really uncomfortable and weird.
We'll get into that. We'll get into everything. So Max falls in love with Bella and Godwin notices and he suggests that they get married. But he wants to remain in control of the situation and keep Bella in this little world that he's created. So what he does is he brings in a lawyer to draft up a contract to ensure basically that once they get married, they have to stay with Godwin. That's one of the conditions of the contract. But meanwhile, Bella has been developing some ideas of her own. She's a very willful child. So,
don't say child.
Well, she is basically a toddler at this stage. Oh. She escapes to the rooftop of the house and she sees the city and she wants to see what the world has to offer. But, Godwin is convincing her that everything outside is trying to kill her and it's all very dangerous. And meanwhile, she discovers her own sexuality.
I was just going to say you glossed over that pretty quickly.
And she discovers what she calls Bella discover happy when she want, which I thought was a great line. My next favourite line in the movie was the housekeeper saying, "She grabbed my hairy business." Do you remember that? So Bella has a grand old time with masturbation.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously confronting. And just at that point in the movie, feels completely unnecessary. Yeah. It's just like, what the fuck is happening? By the end, you're like, okay, that feeds into the narrative. But when that initially happens, you're just like, it's unexpected and feels unnecessary and just feels completely gratuitous. And again, coming right off the back of, I'm super hot for this chick who has a child's brain.
Yeah.
And then to go to that feels exploitative. Now, I'm not suggesting that Emma Stone was exploited by this film. She's a producer on the film. She clearly made her own artistic choices about how this would be made. But it just, to me, it goes into that bucket of films written and made by men where it's like, how can we get a hot chick to basically just feed every fantasy that we've ever had? And look, that's fine. Like, there's a place for that. I don't think necessarily that I need to be the gatekeeper over all art. There's plenty of women who are happy to make that sort of art, and that's fine. But I don't know, it does feel exploitative in a way.
No, I mean, look, the sexual stuff was very gratuitous. There's no sidestepping that. It was graphic and
beyond.
It didn't need to be, but it was.
It was.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not that I'm a prude. Maybe I am. I don't know. It's not really about that. It's more about how it's done. And it's, would you call it pornographic? Like, it literally is, but
yeah, I mean,
in a weird, it's too
comes as
weird
close as you can get in with an R rating.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's one of the I guess the tensions of the movie is that it does try to tell this feminist story, but it does so, you know, in full view of the male gaze.
Yeah,
you know?
that's the weird. That's exactly it. That's exactly the weird thing. And by the end, yes, there is this kind of feminist angle where it's her own agency and she's like leading the charge, and I respect that, and that's great. But again, it's fully within the male gaze, and it's fully done in a way. The screenplay is written by a man, the director is a man, the original author of the book is a man, and I don't know how empowering I find it.
Yeah. So I just want to step through a little bit more in the plot just to kind of give the full arc, and then we can kind of land on some of the themes a bit more. So in defense of Max McCandle and his creepiness towards Bella, he's not making sexual advances towards her.
No.
He's very
quite
much
innocent.
hands off and not until we're married and blah, blah, blah. And she's actually the
Not
one
until I own you.
she's actually the one who's initiating.
Yeah.
That's coming from her, right?
To be fair to him, the minor is hitting on him is what you're trying to say.
Well, you know, but she's got a grown woman's body. Like, come on. It's Emma Stone, for fuck's sake.
Cancelled.
All right. So at this moment in her development, she meets Duncan Wedderburn, who is actually the lawyer that Godwin has brought in to draft the legal agreement that keeps her in the house. And so he thinks, and I quote, "must be quite a woman to warrant such a binding." And he goes off to find her and see what kind of woman she is. And of course, he's captivated, but he's a lot less innocent than Max is. And he's purely like this cad thinking, I'll take her out for a couple of months, have my way with her, and then abandon her, right? Mm-hmm. What did you think of Mark Ruffalo in this movie?
Hot. Sorry, am I objectifying Mark Ruffalo? I apologize sincerely.
I think you are. He's a poor innocent man.
I loved his character, honestly. I thought he was hilarious and very well played and kind of unexpected, to be honest. Like, even though I've seen him in comedies, I don't think of him ever as a comedic actor. And even in this role, it's not straight comedy, obviously, but he's incredibly hilarious, but also incredibly real.
Yeah.
You know, he falls in love with her in spite of himself and hates himself for falling in love with her because he just wants her for sex, but he doesn't. And I don't know, there's something about that that's very of the moment now too. Looking at incel culture and stuff, not that he's an incel by any means, he's far from it, but just this whole red pill attitude of like, I control the narrative and I am in charge and oh shit, now I'm in love and what am I going to do about it? I think he handled it really, really well. And his whole character was probably one of the things I enjoyed most about this movie. What about you?
I mean, there were some moments of his performance that I didn't love. Like maybe later on. I just felt he overplayed a little bit in this role.
How can you overplay in this movie? I mean, really?
Yeah.
You don't think Emma Stone maybe slightly overplayed?
Yeah, it is all very, I guess, melodramatic in a lot of ways. But I think he had a great performance. But there are a few moments in the movie, especially later on, where I just thought he was hamming it up a little bit too much. Like he was kind of having a joke with himself.
He was also nominated for Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah.
And just for balance, I don't just think he did a great job because he's hot. Willem Dafoe did an amazing job too. His character is very well handled.
I think he did a great job.
And I think that is what, if I have to, I don't know, put it this way, saves the film, is the characters. Like Godwin Baxter as played by Willem Dafoe, is an amazingly intricate and fascinating character. This whole backstory of how his father treated him and how he's still compassionate and kind in a way, but also really fucked up. It's just like so fascinating. And Bella Baxter too. I mean, maybe we're showing our biases here, but I found Emma Stone really hammed up her character. And she did. Like, of course she did. And again, that's part of it. But I did find it grating at times.
All right. So Duncan Wedderburn, Mark Ruffalo, climbs up to Bella's window, catches her in the act of masturbation once again. This has happened several times already in the movie. He proposes that they flee together to Lisbon, and she agrees to come. She tells Godwin, we're going to secretly run away.
Which is a great scene on its own.
Yeah.
Announcing I'm going to secretly run away.
But Bella is still loyal to Max and fully intends to marry him. And she's just like, yes, I'll marry you because you seem to be the type that I would marry. But in the meantime, I'm off to have myself an adventure with Duncan. And so they go to Lisbon and there's lots of sex. There's lots of what Bella calls furious jumping that takes place, as well as lots of food, lots of music, dancing and drinking. So Bella is getting a real taste of life here. She's having difficulty fitting into polite society.
You don't say.
And Duncan, who had intended to discard her after a couple of months, instead falls in love with her and turns into quite a jealous and possessive lover, starts fighting anyone who looks at her. And then while they're on this trip, someone recognises her as Victoria Blessington, kind of setting up the ending. I'm not going to go through the whole plot beat by beat, but basically Duncan tries to capture her, lock her in a box, take her onto a ship, and you can see her developing and growing up, and she starts to speak better. She starts to mature.
Ew.
Lewis Carroll's out.
He's long gone.
She starts having a conscience about like other people, and she sees people suffering where they stop at Alexandria, and she gives away all of Duncan's money. They get kicked off the boat because they're destitute. They end up in Paris, where in order to support them, she becomes a prostitute, which is, I guess, a career that she's naturally drawn to given her proclivities.
Again, if we come back to like the male gaze and all that sort of shit, like seeing Emma Stone naked is a very different experience to seeing the brothel customers naked. And it's not pleasant. Okay, it's quite disturbing. Like the scenes, the setup is that they've all got some weird interest, not to kink shame, not my thing, not appealing to me to watch on screen. And I don't know, like where's the balance there?
So meanwhile, back in London while she's in Paris, Godwin and Max, they said that it was a mistake that they got so close to her or something along those lines. And so they create another girl, and we don't really know where she comes from, but her name is Felicity, and she's also growing. And Godwin develops cancer. He writes to Bella, and Bella comes back to London, and that's where we have, I guess, the final conclusion of the movie. This is where she finds out where she came from, and she has to wrestle with that idea. In the end, she decides to marry Max, and the wedding starts, but all of a sudden someone bursts through the door, and it is Duncan with General Alfred Blessington, who is
dun, dun, dun.
Her husband, or Victoria's husband, actually her being his daughter as well as his wife, when you think about it.
Which again, you know.
And she decides to marry him instead, or go back to him instead.
Yeah,
she's
like,
already
this
married
sounds
to him.
cool. He looks rich.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And he turns out to be a controlling bastard.
Beyond controlling
Beyond
bastard.
controlling. And she
Psycho.
escapes. But this whole sequence was added. This wasn't in the book, is what I heard. And I actually didn't like this whole sequence. Like, I felt like
it's a bit disjointed, to be fair. It doesn't sort of fit. I liked it.
It got to that point in the movie, and you were kind of expecting a resolution. And
it's like you got an extra bit.
Yeah, and then it's like, no,
on.
she's just going to decide to go with this guy. It didn't really make any sense.
So supposedly that is the screenwriters or screenwriter deciding that the ending that they had didn't work for film and was too depressing. My understanding, having not read it, is that the book sort of ends on a much more somber note, and that to wrap the movie up, they just felt like it wasn't delivering. And he sort of had an epiphany one day and rang the director and was like, I've got it figured out. What if she decides to go with him? And so they gave her that agency that didn't exist originally in the book. And maybe that's why you're seeing it as doesn't make sense. It's disjointed and so on, because it doesn't really fit with the original narrative. It has been tacked on literally by the director and the screenwriter. I do feel like potentially it better fits a modern sensibility, and maybe it's just a case of like people would be up in arms about this movie if they didn't do that, because they need to show that she's this like bloody modern independent woman.
Yeah.
She's not, but they've made her one. They've given her this sort of makeover. And so they needed to give her agency in that scene to like deliver on that, to make, I don't know, women okay with all the other exploitation? I don't know.
I read that the book ended with still Godwin dying of cancer and then her inheriting the whole thing.
I didn't think he even died in the book.
But she was married and she got married to Max regardless. So I'm really not sure how it adds too much more to that story. What it does add is that element of revenge. Like she takes her husband's body and puts the brain of a goat in it. And so you've got her husband walking around bleating and eating grass, which is, fair enough, I guess, for revenge. I kind of felt that was a bit out of character.
Well, this is the thing. I know that that's been a criticism of it, that's out of character for her. I'm not sure that it is. They're sort of saying, oh, it's too callous. She wouldn't want to do that. This is the woman who earlier in the film had said, I'm going to go punch that baby because it was crying. I mean, I don't think that she has empathy.
No, but there was that break because early on she was, she wanted to kill everything. She wanted to kill a frog.
Squishing eyeballs.
She wanted to punch a baby. But then she hit that point in her development where she wanted to feed the poor and solve the problems of the world and didn't want to hurt people. And then, it felt like it kind of went back on that.
I don't know. She's still pretty callous the whole way through. She's very much just, it's my way or the highway. Like, I just do what I want. I don't really care at all. Like, just emotionless. Like, I'm doing things because they bring me pleasure. And it may bring her pleasure to help the poor, but she's not doing it to help the poor. She's doing it because that's what she wants to do.
Yeah, that
and
is
so
true.
the idea that she would then go and just turn a man into a goat, to me, I found it fitting. I didn't see that as a huge departure from the character, at least in the film. And I did find it to be a nice circularity of her like taking on now that Frankenstein role and to be creating now the beasts.
Yeah.
And clearly, like in the beginning, if she is committing suicide because of this horribly controlling and sociopathic, psychopathic husband, whatever he was, that to come full circle and make him the one who suffers his own consequences instead of her being the one who suffers from those consequences. I didn't really have a problem with that. I don't necessarily think that's like a huge character departure or anything like that.
Yeah, I get that is true. I think there's just this element of like perpetuating maybe that cycle. Like so Godwin's father to Godwin to her.
Yeah, that fits. To me that fits.
It just didn't, that's why it didn't seem like an overcoming and an independence. It felt more like you've become your father kind of.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't have a problem with that as being this kind of end of the story or the beginning of the next one.
Yeah. All right. So shall we talk about some of the feminist elements in a bit more detail? So I've got a few quotes here.
I love a feminist element.
So this is again from Letterboxd. So Nicole Ackman says, I saw someone refer to this as a female version of Frankenstein, which is funny because Frankenstein was written by a woman and this is quite obviously written by a man.
Yep. Tick, tick. Agreed. Wholeheartedly. Okay. This comparison to Frankenstein, it's triggered me. It's not Frankenstein. It has a very similar concept of reanimating and, putting pieces together, I guess, and playing God, for sure. And there is that clear reference there. I guess what I don't like is that forever Frankenstein is the only artwork that's allowed to do that. And everything else is a reference to Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And maybe it is a direct reference to Frankenstein. I don't know about the intentions of the author here, Alistair Gray, and how influenced he was by Mary Shelley, and maybe he was very greatly influenced. But it just feels like, can't we also have this story as a separate thing that's not Frankenstein?
What I think was definitely a reference to Frankenstein, and not necessarily the book, but the elements of the movie. Like you have the whole reanimation with the lightning kind of around her head, and it is that very 19th century Frankenstein look.
True.
And that really draws from the original movie Frankenstein, maybe if not from the Mary Shelley book.
Mm. And look, it's almost certainly derivative of it. I guess I just have an issue with the idea that like Frankenstein is the be-all end-all and we can't ever have this original idea ever again without referencing back. It's like a bigger thing that I have about originality in art, and just because someone was the first one to do it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the one.
Mm-hmm. So here's a review on Letterboxd by Banana Karenina.
That's a good start. This is going to be insightful.
Actually, I think it should have been read as Banana Karenina, like an American. And I think this is probably a good summation of how I think you feel about the movie.
Oh, great. Great. Please tell me how I feel, because I am not sure.
Let me mansplain this to you.
Amazing. You know I love it.
This is such a male fantasy of what female empowerment / feminism could be like.
Oh, my God. Yes.
All clit, no feelings. As soon as anything deep or meaningful could be explored, it shies away from it like, enough with that, back to the fucking. I wish there were more unrestrained, glorious, pleasurable sex in movies, but this is just nasty in a bad way. And a lot of critics / people don't seem to be bothered that these men are having sex with a literal child-brained person just because it's premised upon her liberated agency. Even though that can't be the case because she doesn't understand what she's doing. Frankenstein's Manny Pixie Fuck Doll Monster. Ew, no thanks. I don't want to say cis men can't make movies about feminism, but it turned out to be awful.
Amazing. Yes, she is just a blow-up doll living in a Barbie world. That's exactly how I feel about it, honestly. It's like there was something uncomfortable about it the whole way. And again, I'm not going to say I'm unhappy the movie was made. Like, in a world where we're living with countless bloody remakes and just superhero movies and all of this bullshit, I'm glad something original has bubbled up. I'm glad that something creative and different and challenging is there to give us something to have a conversation about, for sure. But at the same time, yes, I'm incredibly uncomfortable about how it was handled. It's not right. It's fucked up. But I mean, it's okay that it's fucked up because it's very openly fucked up. So it's not insidious in a way where it's trying to sneak, you know, a message through. It's fully Frankensteined messages, basically. It's like, yes, women's empowerment. Let's sew that together with just porn, basically. And those two things do not mix. So you're going to end up with something pretty fucked up.
So I want to read also something from Cinemaholic. This is why perhaps watching Bella Baxter travel the world without abandon, exploring her sexuality, forming her own beliefs, questioning everything, her ease to say no when she doesn't want something and moving decisively forward when she does is so captivating. Bella is a fantasy for the viewers, one that they know is too idealistic to be real. There is no way someone like Bella could survive in the real world. She would be eaten up by it. It is only the absurdity of her world, in which she herself remains the most absurd thing, and the plot armor that keeps her from ending in a ditch. Should the viewers be lost in Bella's fantasy world, characters like Harry are brought in to remind Bella, as well as the viewers, that it is best to remain within the confines of realism rather than indulge in fantasy that will never come true. So Harry is the guy she meets on the boat. But what I thought about this is that I think what doesn't sit right in the movie is that there is one element of it that is a female fantasy and an element of it that is a male fantasy. And it's kind of both of them squashed together in one character in a way that is not satisfying to either.
Yeah, because I don't know that it is a female fantasy, honestly. Like, that's the thing I think that's missing. It's presented as one, but it is not one. It's like the shell of a female fantasy. It's like the idea of a female fantasy, but it's not one.
It's like a caricature, but it is in the same way a caricature of a male fantasy. Like you say,
maybe
it's the caricature
I can't speak to that.
of, well, you know, men just want children who are pretty. it's a caricature of that fantasy as well, that every man is going to be falling in love with this woman. And it's
when
also
she's incredibly offensive and completely ridiculous.
Yeah, but that part of it in this quote is saying that it's a female fantasy. Like, imagine that you just do what you want and you say what you want and men all love you. And there is that fantastic element, and it's being lived out on the screen in like clearly a male fantasy version of events as well. So
yeah, I mean, even your phrasing of that, the idea that a woman's fantasy is to say what she wants and still be loved by a man, missing the mark there.
but that's what I just said, that it's kind of a caricature of a fantasy. All right, so I wanted to also just raise this little thing from screenrant.com, and they give 8 reasons why Poor Things is a feminist masterpiece, and I'd like to lay out those 8 reasons and see if you agree with them. Number 1, Bella Baxter's sexual liberation is a staple of feminist theory.
Hers
Reason
specifically?
number 1. Well, sexual liberation is a staple of feminist theory. She's living out a sexual liberation, therefore feminist masterpiece is the argument. That's number 1.
I mean, arguably not sure how liberated someone who's been under lock and key her entire life can be. But anyway, yeah, go on.
Number 2, this one is a little bit ridiculous. Poor Things reverts the male gaze with graphic male nudity.
Oh.
So it's saying, like, as well as having the male gaze, you've also got...
I have already just gone over this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The graphic male nudity is not there for titillation of anyone.
Of literally anyone.
But there were those scenes with Mark Ruffalo going at it with...
Yeah, but like, he's not really the star of those scenes, is he?
Every male character desires to use, confine, or possess Bella.
Correct.
So that's why it's feminist. Poor Things identifies several patriarchal systems of oppression, which it does.
It does. And you know what? And just the point you just made, I'm laughing, but I did feel like it was self-aware. So even if it's written by a man, directed by a man, etc., there was a level of self-awareness and, as you say, sort of like parodying this idea of what's attractive to men or what that means. It's a level of self-awareness, even though it's just perpetuating it. So I can see how that exists.
Yep.
I'm not sure that it's a fully redeeming quality, but it's not without its own acknowledgement of what's going on, at least.
All right, number 5. Bella Baxter is empowered by having agency in her choices.
Like, empowered by what? Certainly not by her circumstances.
Poor Things exposes masculine social expectations and insecurities, which I think it does.
It does.
Yeah.
No, it absolutely does. There's a couple of things going on, and that's why I don't necessarily hate it outright, right? Because it's not just in-your-face porn, for example. There is other stuff going on. It's complex. It's problematic, though. It's not like this straight female empowerment piece, which nor does it need to be, by the way. It's not necessarily going to be that. There's an element of that, but it's a bit fucked up.
Yeah.
And there's an element of like this self-awareness about the male gaze and what have you, but that's a bit fucked up too. So there's bits there, but they're not really delivered in a way that, to me as a female viewer, makes it like a fucking feminist movie. There's certainly topics that are relevant to feminists. There's issues that are brought and highlighted that are feminist issues, but it's not a fucking feminist movie to me at all.
Number 7, Duncan Wedderburn represents the trappings of polite society. I'm not sure how relevant this one, given it's like 19th century polite society. And the last one is Poor Things calls for socialist feminism by challenging the status quo. I don't think that's even a point, to be fair.
No,
They
should have
had a
stuck
couple,
with like
they had a
3
couple good
points.
ones. Yeah, I think they could have really summarised that one. Okay.
What do you think? What does your male gaze tell you about this film? I mean, you did like preface it by saying like, I'm really into Emma Stone at the moment. So like I watched
I was watching a bunch of Emma Stone movies and,
sure
and
you have.
TV series, and I thought I'd check this one out. And let me just say, it paid off.
I wasn't going to let you say it.
What do I think about this movie? Yeah, everything you say is true. But the fact is, it's multifaceted and it's complex, and you can't come out of it and say, like we said before, yes, this thing is 100%. I agree with it. I don't agree with it. I think it is trying to be a feminist, right? I think it's trying to have a core theme that is like, hey, this is the female experience, right? It's trying to say that. But it's also caught up in the fact that it's not. And it's caught up in the fact that, yes, it is a man that is telling the story and it knows that, obviously. But it's also saying, well, let's entrench this into the male gaze. And it's adding these layers of fantasy to it. And as I said kind of in the outset, even the sets are fantastic. You know, the sound is fantastic. None of it looks real. Like there's this whole element of unreality. What is it actually trying to tell you? I don't think anyone looks at it and goes, yes, that was very tasteful. And I feel like it's supposed to be hard to take and it's supposed to be disgusting and disturbing in many ways. And I don't think you can call that a criticism. You know, a lot of the critiques were around the fact that, it's disgusting, it's a literal child in a woman's body, where's the consent, blah, blah, blah. Yes, those are criticisms, but it wasn't trying to be tasteful, it was trying to be distasteful, it's trying to be uncomfortable.
It's trying to raise those issues.
All this stuff and all of the nudity, all of the gratuitous sex in the movie. I don't think you're supposed to look at that and go like, that was wonderful. It's kind of supposed to be yuck.
No, I agree. They know what they're doing. They're doing it on purpose. They're doing it to bring awareness to that. But I'm just,
but I don't think I don't think it's a movie that you can say like it has a social agenda. I don't think it's trying to be like, let's be feminist and raise awareness of feminist issue. There is almost a parody of feminist issues in this movie as well.
Yeah.
Like it's a mixed message in many ways.
It's 100% a mixed message. It was not what I was expecting, let's put it that way. I did not go into this with any expectations, to be honest, but I was just like dumbfounded by what I watched. I'm like, I do not know how to feel like about this. I've never been so confused in my life about how to feel about a movie, which in itself is fascinating to me. So I like that about it.
I'm quite surprised that it got so far in the Oscars. Like it just doesn't seem at all like an Oscar bait movie.
Not at all.
One thing I will point out as well on the topic of differences between the book and the movie is that the book is actually told from Max's perspective.
Yeah.
Like it's actually Max's story about Bella, which has an element of unreliable narrator. And I think that makes the movie make a bit more sense. Because if you think of it as his fantastical retelling of Bella's story, then you're injecting all of this male fantasy stuff into her story. And that's why it becomes like a perversion of her story. And I wonder why they did actually not do that, because I think that would have actually added more context.
I think they wanted to make Barbie 2.0 with the blow-up doll. I think they were aiming to modernize it in that way, to make it her story. And I'm not sure that...
But it wasn't her story.
No, it wasn't. Exactly. And I think by doing that, by a man doing that, they missed the point.
Yeah, maybe they didn't want to have a man telling a woman's story because that would have been seen as a different kind of...
That's exactly what happened. No, but that's the thing. That's the issue with it, I think. Like, it's men trying to tell a women's story. And look, I've written male characters. It's okay to do that. But I think if you're trying to sell a feminist message and you don't get it, that's always going to be awkward. And I think that's what's happened here. It's like, points for trying. You know, you were trying, but you missed some crucial factors. And I've just been second screening you because I've just been Googling while you're talking there. And it was just making me think of men writing women badly.
Yeah.
And so this is my favorite of all time. This is like the classics. Cassandra woke up to the rays of the sun streaming through the slats on her blinds, cascading over her naked chest. She stretched, her breasts lifting with her arms as she greeted the sun. She rolled out of bed and put on a shirt, her nipples prominently showing through the thin fabric. She breasted boobily to the stairs and tittered downwards.
I would like to buy your book.
This is men writing women badly.
Yes.
And I think that's a little bit of what's going on. It's not the worst, but it's bad.
So Emma Stone is a woman.
Yes, correct.
Why do you think that?
Sorry, I wasn't sure before, but now I'm pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure we now know. Sorry, I just a scene popped into my head.
I think it might be the same scene that just popped into my head.
So what do you, like, get inside her head as if you were a child's brain? Like, why do you think that she connected with the movie and wanted to make it and gave it such a committed performance?
Listen, I don't know. I can't speak for her at all. I don't know. And she was passionate about it clearly. She did a great job. Like it is a well done movie. And there are elements like we've just leaned into the feminist side of things, but there are a bunch of other things about this film that I really enjoyed, just straight up entertainment, like the costuming, for example, like the Frankenstein elements, like the character of Willem Dafoe's character, Godwin Baxter. But I don't know. I honestly don't know what she saw in it that made her want to produce this film. Perhaps she just saw the opportunity to play a really interesting character. I imagine for women in Hollywood, that is rare. And she wanted to give it a go. Like me personally, and I'm not an actor nor a producer, it wouldn't have spoken to me. So I don't know.
I did see some Emma Stone interviews, but she never really got deep about what she thought about this movie and like why she wanted to do it and what attracted her to it. I like to think, is my internal headcanon, as they say, it's because Emma Stone is just like an absolute freak. And she's just kinky and perverted as fuck. And that's why she wanted to do the movie.
You know what? That tracks. For you, not her.
So that was my recommendation.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you loved it as you loved all of my recommendations so far.
Always. Deeply.
So what do you got for me?
So I'm going to give you a palate cleanser. And by palate cleanser, I mean I'm going to make it so much worse.
Okay.
You think Poor Things was bad. So again, just shout out to my co-strike crew and again, specifically to Selena. But I've just found out about this amazing author who I never knew existed. And now I do. And I feel complete as a human for knowing that he exists. And maybe you've heard of him already. His name is Chuck Tingle.
Why does that name ring a bell?
Why does it tingle a bell? Chuck Tingle is a homosexual erotic fiction author.
That's exactly who I was thinking of when you mentioned it, because it came up in conversation
that
in
guy.
another group, that writes like absurd titles.
Yes.
I think I've heard of this person.
Have you read any of
No,
his
I
work?
have not.
Okay,
No.
so I'm going to recommend to you that you read literally any
Okay.
Chuck Tingle work of your choosing.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to struggle to pick your favorite because I struggle to pick my favorite of all the many, many titles of Chuck Tingle fiction. Now, again, I've just stumbled across him. I've never heard of him before, but I'm obsessed with his titles. That's it. You don't even need to read beyond that, but I'm going to force you to.
Yeah, I heard of him in discussion with my friend who is a publisher, like a small publisher. And what I hear about Chuck Tingle is that he's insanely successful in what he does.
Yeah.
All right. I'll choose the one with the most outlandish title.
Good luck finding. Good luck. Would you like to share with us just as a little taster
let me
for
look
the
some up.
listeners of what's in store next time? Now, this is a man who self-identifies as autistic and I think pretty much credits his writing style to his autism. He has written basically a book and let's call it a short story in many cases, a week for 10 years. So I can see you've landed upon the list
I've just
of titles.
Chuck Tingle bibliography. What stood out to me is Pounded in the Butt by My Own Butt.
Yes. So what I love about just Chuck Tingle as a concept is that he writes these homoerotic fictions about men.
Yeah.
And, well, there's others, but anyway, largely about men having like a love affair with a concept.
Yeah.
So go on. What
Okay.
else we got?
Donald Trump, I know I have to emphasize it is Donald, not Donald, just in case you thought this was against Trump. Donald Trump pounded in the butt by the handsome Russian T-Rex, who also peed on his butt and then blackmailed him with the videos of his butt getting peed on. That is the title. That's great. This is like an embarrassment of choices.
So my first exposure here was that I went on his website, chucktingle.com, and there was a section called Get Well Soon. And I'm like, what's that? So I clicked on that. And there's actually some free stories there. And he does encourage people to donate in place of paying for the stories. And so I read a couple of those.
This one is amazingly meta.
Oh, God, here we go.
Reamed by my reaction to the title of this book.
This is what I mean.
This might be. I'm worried that if I read one, like I'm just not going to stop.
It's going to blow your mind. So okay.
What? Slammed in the butthole by my concept of linear time.
Okay, I want you to click on Get Well Soon. So go to the menu.
Okay.
Yes, struggling.
What am I doing?
You are me a week ago, okay? Because I was losing my mind over this. I was so in love with the idea of erotic fiction about concepts that I just can't get over it. Did you find the sub-menu? In the menu? I'm not on your wall, mate. You look around you. Your mind has been so blown. You're waiting for like the physical manifestation.
Getting slammed in the butt by the concept of the menu here. All right, hang on.
Okay. Have you found it?
No, first of all, I love this website. It just has Chuck Tingle is the greatest author of our generation. This is amazing.
This is a guy with just epic confidence. I love him so much. Okay, so he wrote these stories in the pandemic times, right? Because by this stage he was already famous, right? And people were begging him to write about the pandemic. And he's like, no, I'm not going to write about something that makes people sad. But what he did write were these like amazing public service messages about how to keep yourself safe during the pandemic. Now, will you please read some of the titles for us?
My handsome, sentient face mask protects me despite the ridiculous conspiracy theories that he won't. Also, he pounds my butt. Not pounded by anything while I practice responsible social distancing.
So one thing that's interesting as well about Chuck Tingle is that he writes asexual erotica, which I can't comprehend, but...
The physical manifestation of washing my hands gets me off.
That's a lesbian erotic fiction. So I read the first one and the last one on that list, and I won't spoil it. I'll be interested to hear what you think when you've had a read.
I'm pretty sure I'm just going to read all of these.
I'm glad to have opened your mind to a whole new world.
And that about wraps it up.
You.
And until next time, right on.
Right on.
Thank you for listening to Not Quite Right. If you'd like to reach us via email or follow us on social media, you can find all the links on our website, notquiterightpodcast.com. That's WRITE. And if you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting app.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
You keep saying his name differently every time you say it.
Timothée Chalamet.
Chalamet?
Chalami. Just want myself a Chalami sandwich.
You really spill this everywhere.
Apparently, I saw an interview. It's pronounced Timothée.
Fuck off. No, don't fuck off with your own name, but just, I don't know.
It's like French Canadian or something. I don't know.
Timothée.
I agree. Like, I'm sure he's a fine actor, but every time I look at him, I'm like... You know, like if you see a movie starring Timothée Chalamet...
Foppish is the word that comes to mind.
Foppish?
I don't know, just foppish.
If you see a movie starring Timothée Chalamet, he's not a draw card. Like, I'm not like, oh, I'll go and see that. But
maybe that's because we're old.
Yeah, maybe.
Like, you know,
maybe
the young people look at Johnny Depp and go, ew.
Yeah.
And I go like, fair enough. But like, if we could just rewind time 20 years, you would understand. But I look at him and I'm like, ew.
So he's just like a little boy.
He's a little man-child. Let's air this. I don't think. He's probably tall, but he does not strike me as tall.
Yeah. That's his problem. That's why he can't get behind. If he was taller, fine. But like, you know.
I mean, I don't think Johnny Depp's tall, but he has a taller vibe about him. Yeah. You don't have to be tall. You just have to have a tall vibe.
Let's close this out. Okay, how should I end this show if it's not, well, that about wraps it up? I'm
teasing you. Last time I was drunk.
That's what we got for you this evening on the Not Quite Right podcast.
I love that you're so drunk now. You're so happy. So drunk. You're so happy.
Thought we were wrapping things up. It would be safe to have a couple of glasses of wine. But.
And then I just blew your mind with Chuck Tingle. You can say it.
No,
I
feel like
it's okay.
I feel so seen now, and like literally, there's nothing else I can possibly
just say it, doll.
Okay, so that about wraps it up. Do it one more time. So that about wraps it up.
And what? You want me to be dead silent? I've tried getting excited.
No. The first time I interrupted you, and the second time,
go.
Go what?
Do it again.
And that about wraps it up.
You.
Nice. And until next time, ride on.
Right on.
Okay, that's it. Finally.